Hey everyone, ready for a deep dive into something pretty wild.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about that Delta Airlines crash that just happened uh, yesterday at Toronto Pearson.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, using all the CNN coverage,
Yeah.
witness accounts,
Right.
expert opinions, all that, to figure out just how everyone walked away from this plane that flipped upside down.
That's pretty amazing, right?
Yeah,
What I think is really striking about this incident is that it really highlights the advancements in aviation safety we've made.
yeah,
We often see, those first reports and we brace ourselves for the worst. But this outcome is really a testament to how far we've come.
it really is. You see those pictures and it's like,
Right.
oh man, this is gonna be bad.
It's scary, yeah.
Yeah. So picture this, right? It's February 18th, 2025, Delta Flight 4819 coming in from Minneapolis,
Okay.
landing in Toronto.
Right.
Strong winds, recent snowfall,
Not great.
not ideal conditions.
Oh.
But despite all of that, the plane skids off the runway,
Oh.
flips over. But here's the thing, no fatalities.
Wow.
18 passengers had injuries, thankfully none life-threatening,
Yeah.
but everyone survived.
That's incredible.
It really is incredible,
Right.
especially when you hear, those vivid accounts from passengers, like one describing hanging like bats inside the overturned plane.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine.
So how did this happen? How did everyone make it out alive?
Well, there's a few things going on here. First, the plane itself, a Bombardier CRJ-900,
Okay.
it's designed with safety in mind. Think of it like crumple zones in a car.
Oh, interesting.
So certain parts like the wings are designed to break away on impact, and that absorbs energy.
Right.
And it prevents the fuselage, that's the main body of the plane, from being totally torn apart.
It was like a controlled disintegration to protect the passengers.
Exactly. And then you've got the suits themselves. Those are built to withstand much greater forces than you would experience in just normal turbulence.
Okay.
So they played a crucial role in keeping those passengers secure, even as the plane was flipping.
That makes sense. So the plane's built tough, but what about the, human side of this? The pilots, the crew, the first responders.
Absolutely. From the reports we have, the crew acted really quickly and efficiently to get everyone off that plane.
Right.
Their training for emergencies, really paid off. And then you can't forget about the first responders on the ground. They were right there, and they were praised for their textbook response.
It sounds like a real combination of, smart design skilled professionals and maybe a little bit of luck,
Yeah, for sure.
all working together.
Definitely. Even the airport itself, despite, initially shutting down all 5 runways, they were able to reopen 3 of them relatively quickly.
Oh, wow.
So it speaks to the systems in place to manage these big crises.
Yeah. So we've got this incredible story of survival, but it's also happening at the same time as some other aviation incidents that we've seen,
Right.
like the American Airlines and Jeju Air collisions. Does this, raise any red flags for you?
It's definitely something to keep an eye on. While each incident is unique, it's important to look for any kind of recurring themes or, potential vulnerabilities in the system.
Like what kind of things should we be thinking about?
Well, for starters, are there common factors like, the weather conditions, air traffic control procedures, even pilot training? Are there any emerging trends that need further investigation?
Okay.
These are the questions that we need to be asking, as we continue to rely on air travel.
So while this Delta crash, is ultimately a story of survival, it also serves as a reminder that we can't just get complacent
You got it.
about aviation safety.
Exactly. And as we dig deeper into this incident specifically, I want you to keep that broader context in mind.
Okay.
How can we learn from this, not just to prevent similar crashes, but to just continuously improve the safety of air travel as a whole?
That's a great point. So let's go back to the crash itself.
Yeah.
What can you tell us about the investigation so far? What are they looking into as the potential cause?
So the Transportation Safety Board of Canada, they're the ones, heading up the investigation.
Okay.
And they're looking at, all sorts of different factors.
Right.
Interestingly, even though we had those strong winds and that recent snowfall, the airport fire chief actually stated that the runway was dry
Oh, wow.
at the time of the crash. And no significant crosswinds either.
So it sounds like weather might not be the main thing they're looking at.
Yeah, it's too early to say for sure, but they're going to be analyzing that black box data,
Right.
examining all the wreckage, and interviewing the crew, the passengers,
Of course.
try and get a clearer picture.
Speaking of the crew you mentioned, they were commended for how quickly they responded. What exactly did they do that was so important in getting everyone off safely?
Well, it seems from what we're hearing that they just started those evacuation procedures immediately.
Yeah.
Made sure everyone stayed calm, followed all the instructions,
Right.
and they had to deal with the fact that, the plane was upside down, which adds a whole other level of, difficulty to this situation.
Yeah, I can only imagine. You train for these emergencies, but when you're dealing with a plane that's upside down, that's got to be so challenging.
Absolutely. And it really speaks to their professionalism and their ability to think clearly in such a stressful situation. And remember, they're not just, getting themselves out. They're responsible for everyone on board.
Yeah.
Dozens of passengers, some of whom might be injured or panicked.
You mentioned earlier that there were 18 passengers injured. Do we know anything about the types of injuries?
Most of them, thankfully, were relatively minor.
Okay.
Bumps, bruises, things like that.
Yeah.
A few passengers were initially, reported to be in critical condition.
Right.
But thankfully, none of those turned out to be life-threatening.
That's good to hear. It sounds like those strong seats really did their job in preventing some more serious injuries.
They definitely played a vital role. And it's interesting, to contrast this with that similar crash back in '87 in Denver,
Yep.
where the seats weren't as strong and unfortunately there were fatalities.
Right.
So this incident really highlights how important those safety improvements have been over the years.
So we've talked about the design of the plane, the crew's response, the relatively minor injuries,
Right.
all, pointing towards this positive outcome.
Yeah.
But like you said before, there have been other recent aviation incidents.
Mm-hmm.
How do we connect the dots? Is there a bigger picture here that we need to be aware of?
That's the big question. While every incident will have its own, specific cause, it's so important to analyze them all together and look for any underlying patterns or, systemic issues.
So you're saying that even though everyone survived this particular crash doesn't mean we can just, breathe a sigh of relief and move on.
Exactly. This incident, along with all those others, should really be a catalyst for a much broader conversation about aviation safety. What are the emerging risks? Are there any gaps in, regulations or oversight? Are we investing enough in research and the right technologies to address all these potential vulnerabilities?
This is where it gets really interesting and maybe even a little bit unsettling for those of us who, rely on air travel.
Yeah.
It's easy to think that everything's fine because we don't often hear about these big incidents.
Right.
But maybe that's part of the problem.
It's kind of like that duck analogy. On the surface, everything looks calm and smooth. But underneath the water, those little feet are paddling like crazy.
Right.
We might not see all the, frantic activity going on behind the scenes, but we need to acknowledge that it's there.
Okay, so we're talking about these potential vulnerabilities in the system. What are some real-world examples of, things that might be slipping through the cracks?
Well, one area that comes up a lot is, the whole increasing complexity of air traffic management.
Right.
With, more flights, more congested airspace, and all these new technologies being integrated, the chances for errors or things getting overlooked, they just increase.
So it's not just about the planes themselves, it's the whole infrastructure that supports air travel.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's the issue of pilot training.
Right.
While pilots go through, really rigorous training, are we really doing enough to prepare them for these new challenges?
Yeah.
Like automation complacency,
Right.
Or, that increasing reliance on all these complex computer systems.
That's a really interesting point. We tend to think of pilots as, these super highly skilled individuals.
Right.
But as technology changes, the nature of their job changes too.
For sure. And it's not just about the, technical side of things.
Yeah.
There's also the human factor, fatigue, stress, making decisions under pressure.
Of course.
These are all areas that need, constant attention research to make sure that, pilots are doing well and performing at their best.
So we have all these potential vulnerabilities in the system. And then we have this Delta crash where, thankfully everything went as well as it possibly could.
Right.
What can we learn from this specific incident to address these broader concerns?
That's why this investigation is so important. By really digging into the data, the wreckage, all the testimonies, we can figure out exactly what contributed to this, whether it was equipment, procedures, human actions.
And then use that information to make changes, improvements to try to prevent similar incidents in the future.
Exactly. It's about using every single one of these incidents as a learning experience, not just to fix that specific problem, but to make the whole system stronger.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the main takeaway you want to leave our listeners with?
I think it's this. While this Delta crash, You know, it's a story of survival, and it shows how much progress we've made in aviation safety.
Yeah.
It also reminds us that we can't afford to get complacent.
Right.
We need to constantly question things, investigate, and innovate to make sure that air travel stays as safe as possible.
Absolutely. And for everyone listening, the next time you're at the airport boarding a plane, take a moment to just think about how complex this is.
Yeah.
This incredible feat of engineering and human ingenuity.
It really is.
And maybe even ask yourself, what can we do?
Right.
Collectively, individually,
Yeah.
to contribute to making air travel safer?
Absolutely. Keep asking those questions, stay informed, and never stop learning.
Well said. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, safe travels, everyone.